City of Thorns is a remarkable book, comes as a timely reminder that the vast majority of the world's refugee population will never see European shores.
Deep shock and interest in the camp itself. Why have I never heard of this massive place, which is the size of, a big city, where people have been living for 30 years already.
People, when they hear about camps, they, to be honest, especially racist people, they think we are barbarians. We're just doing, killing each other.
One of the notorious things that happens is that the UN provides all the fuel to the police vehicles. The Kenyan police drive the vehicles into the camp. They siphon all the fuel out of the police vehicles. They sell it into the camp, and then they go back again, and they say that they've driven 100 miles all the way around the camp, but they haven't.
Welcome everyone to Fractured Podcast. Today we have with us Ben Rawlence. Ben Rawlence, he's a British writer and a founder director of Black Mountains College. And he wrote the book, City of Thorns, 9 Lives in the World's Largest Refugee Camp. Welcome with us, Ben.
Thank you.
The Guardian said about your book, I quote, City of Thorns is a remarkable book, comes as a timely reminder that the vast majority of the world's refugee population will never see European shores. That's actually, I know it, but when I read it, I was like, most people think that, there's a lot of refugees here. The one we left behind, there are so many. And the ones they did not have the opportunity to come here, that's a lot, yeah. So I would like to start by asking you, how did you come up with the idea of writing about the camp Dadaab, and what was your motivation? How did you start writing?
I think like many people, I had a limited idea of what the refugee experience was like. And I was working for Human Rights Watch in the Horn of Africa, in Kenya and Somalia, and I was sent to the camp on assignment to look at, in fact, to interview people who had recently come from Somalia about the war in Somalia. But the actual conditions in the camp itself and the stories of the camp were not part of the mission that I was asked to investigate. And when I went to the camp, I did my job. I found recent arrivals from Somalia. I got recent information about what was happening in the war there. But I came away with this deep shock and interest in the camp itself. Why have I never heard of this massive place, which is the size of, a big city, where people have been living for 30 years already? How come I haven't heard about this? And I think other people need to know about it. So that was my motivation, was to tell people about the camp and about the experience of living there, because it was fascinating. It wasn't all miserable either. I mean, yes, living there is difficult, but there was so many stories, love stories, rags to riches stories, drama. Of all different kinds, which was interesting and fascinating and different, which I thought that people needed to know.
Mm-hmm. Can you tell us about the creation of the Dadaab camp, and where is it exactly on the map? We're gonna put a map on the screen, but just to show people where is it exactly.
So it's almost exactly on the equator. In the Horn of Africa, almost also exactly on the border between Kenya and Somalia. There's a very straight line drawn in the desert, which the British drew in 1963. And Dadaab is almost exactly on that line. If you go across the Indian Ocean, in a straight line, you come to a little bit south of Bombay. And it was originally formed in 1991 after the collapse of the Siad Barre regime in in Somalia in the late 80s and early 90s. A lot of people fled south, and that was the first place they arrived. And the United Nations set up a reception center there. And then over time, as the war in Somalia has sort of failed to stabilize, more and more people came in different waves. In 2006, in 2010 with the drought and the conflict, and then again 2016, and even recently there's still people coming. So it's grown and grown, and then it has also then been a place where Kenya has sent refugees from other countries, so from Sudan, Eritrea, Ethiopia, and so on.
You mentioned that Dadaab is a city on its own. It has developed its own informal economy, education, a social network. What have you observed that made you realize that that made you feel the sense of community, that these people are adapting in a creative way to live their lives? Because, people, when they hear about camps, they, to be honest, especially racist people, they think we are barbarians. We're just doing, killing each other.
Yeah, and I think that's so far from the truth. I mean, the reality is when you live in a very tight community like that, in close proximity to other people, you have a very rich human society. And that's part of what I found shocking about the camp was, the fact that there were football leagues,
Wow.
that there were community democracies, like with each block had its own block leader, had its own community meetings, had its own culture. The Sudanese sector was S3, and this block, they planted trees around it. They, in fact, excluded Somalis from that area. They built a church. They had their own, they had their own shop. They had their own vegetable garden, So the organic way in which society grows and is built by people who are living there, I think is fascinating and really interesting. It's a real testament to the human spirit and to the creativity and resilience of these people. And I think there's so many lessons for people in other parts of the world who might have more affluent situation, to look at the resilience and the creativity of the guys in the camp, and learn from them. I mean, in some cases there are sort of social justice paradigms which are being played out, which are really innovative. So, for example, the way in which women are playing a leading role in the political structures of the camp. That's something that cities across the world should be looking at and copying, actually. It's not, it's not all, what can I say? It is definitely not all negative. There are lots of things in some cases where camp life is leading.
Wow. And even individuals, they can learn from this, because so many people here in Europe, they have some excuses. I don't have the right money. I don't have the right place. I don't have the money to start this or that. These people, like, from nothing. And also it shows that, like you said about the human spirit, you can oppress me, you can oppress my body, you can put a limit on me where to go, but you can never oppress the artist in me, the creative person in me. That just shows how powerful human beings are, and we are beyond this just animal behaviors that they think we are. I don't know. So you wrote about some characters on your book. I'm still in the process of reading it. I'm just fascinated by them. I'm like, what's gonna happen? I usually don't like to spoil, so I didn't read anything about the book or the ending or something. How did you come to choose these characters?
I'm very fond of the people I wrote about. They're my friends. And I chose their stories because they represented something interesting and important about the camp. So I interviewed originally about 200 people, and I chose these 9 because I was looking for some male, some female, some Somali, some Sudanese, people from different backgrounds and people who had different experiences in the camp. So to find these, these people with different experiences was my aim, and actually the following the stories of these people was amazing, because, like you say, yes, they have incredible stories to tell, and you want to know what happens. You want to know, does she fall in love? Does does it work out? Does the baby survive? These kinds of questions, and it's very human.
Mm-hmm. Wow, really. Just sometimes, when you have a lot of, I notice in myself, when you have so many problems, you would think that you will never have hopes. But I think hopes are the only one that give you, a sense of, hey, I really want to live. I want to make something out of it. I want to, say that, hey, I have a voice, I'm here, I'm alive, and having goals and stuff like that, just like smaller goals, like getting married, like the first boy, I don't know how to say his name, Guled.
Guled, yeah.
Yeah, Guled. So falling in love and just thinking about his wife, just these simple goals that kept him going and kept him surviving again and again against those bad people. The Dadaab camp has a reputation of being dangerous. Was this your experience there? How is it for a Westerner being there and a Somali being there?
It does have a reputation for being dangerous. I think in the beginning, it had a reputation for being very peaceful. In the early 90s, the UN staff told me about how they used to sleep in the camp. They used to go to weddings and parties and then just fall asleep in the sand. And walk home in the morning. Everything was fine. Then we had the rise of Al-Shabaab in the 2000s, which made things a bit harder. But in fact, I think the camp is still relatively safe for most people. The question is, dangerous for who? So the UN has an assumption that all of the UN staff are a kidnap target. And so you have a lot of security protocols around foreigners visiting and UN staff. So you have armed escorts, you have bulletproof vehicles, you have a limited period of time you can be in the camp, and this kind of thing. At the same time, you have this very tight neighborhood watch communities, which mean that the camp is very well policed in some respects by the residents themselves. But it is dangerous, particularly for anybody who goes against any of the gangs. So there are organized gangs in the camp that control particular businesses. So as long as you're not a bit like the mafia. As long as you're not treading on their toes, you're fine. But if you do upset those networks, you can be in trouble. And the other people for whom it's not very safe are women and girls who are living on the outskirts of the camp, or in some areas where the community is not so well organized, because there is quite high incidence of sexual violence. So it's broadly speaking, it's safer than some places, but there are particular groups who are vulnerable. And ironically, I would say that despite all of the security concerns around the UN staff, the UN and international staff are actually not that at risk.
You mentioned that they self-organize this, this watch. They have to defend themselves, because there is a thing when you become a victim, you have something clicks in your mind. There's something tells you this will not happen again. And I remember Dr. Jordan Peterson saying that becoming a victim later, some people start to learn how to self-defense. Some people get guns because they want to say this will not happen again. And they are right. I mean, they have to protect themselves. But it's just now you are explaining that mafias are inside. So there is a lot of dangers from every angle in that camp. And you mentioned the sexual harassment and the rape. I read about the Kenyan soldiers. So is that true that Kenyan soldiers, they did a lot of stuff to women?
Yeah, so the Kenya has a responsibility for law and order in the camp. The UN provides the public services and food aid, but the Kenya police and the Kenya military don't have a very good record in terms of the rights of refugees and, in particular, sexual violence.
You, in your book, you show a lot of disappointment and anger at some humanitarian organization, especially the UN. UN officials earn $9,000 a month, tax-free, safe in protected compounds, while refugees allowed to work under a deal with the host government, do similar jobs, but earn 100 times less. It's slave labor. What's going on?
I have some sympathy for the UN. I mean, they're working within a difficult environment. They have evolved in terms of a particular bureaucratic structure. But what I was trying to point out really was not that any particular person within the UN has done anything wrong, but the way that things have evolved is tragic, because you have a UN system which is predicated on expatriate wages and high salaries and so on. And then you have these mechanisms which were supposed to allow refugees to work and earn money. They call it the incentive worker program. So refugees can work and they get some money, but the money that they get is less than the minimum wage in Kenya, and it's really not fair. And the irony was, when the kidnapping happened and the security situation in the camp got tougher, the UN paid workers withdrew, and they gave much more work to the incentive workers, which ironically meant that the incentive workers were doing the job of the UN staff, but they were being paid only $150 a month or something. So that's what I mean, is this kind of tragic turn of events which has led to this very, very unequal system.
Wow. Is the army allowed to go inside and protect people, or is there any police?
So yeah, the police patrol. They're supposed to patrol, but one of the notorious things that happens is that the UN provides all the fuel to the police vehicles. The Kenyan police drive the vehicles into the camp. They siphon all the fuel out of the police vehicles. They sell it into the camp, and then they go back again, and they say that they've driven 100 miles all the way around the camp, but they haven't. So the structure, again, the UN is trying to give trucks and fuel and money to the police to do the job, to look after the refugees, but because of the corruption, the Kenya police end up not doing the job that they're supposed to do. So there's so many. The camp is a kind of wonderful example of all of these systems which are supposed to work but which don't work, and end up impacting on the lives of the people who live there.
My God, you mentioned you interviewed 200 people. Did you feel any sense of trust? They are starting to build trust. Do they ever trust someone again there? And if yes, who do they trust there?
I think I was a beneficiary of, at that time, which is nearly 10 years ago now, I was a beneficiary of an existing faith in Western organizations and in Westerners. So the prevailing attitude among the refugees was, if only the West knew our situation, they would help us. So there was a constant feeling that journalists like me were useful people, friendly people, and our job was to tell the story of what was happening to the refugees. And lots of refugees wanted to tell their own stories as well. So there was quite a few journalism training programs and things like that I participated in. And people were very trusting. They, I think broadly the experience of the UN was that the UN, if you could get FaceTime with a UN official, then generally there would be something to be gained by that you would get your case heard, you would get extra assistance if you needed it. Most people are fighting to get FaceTime with UN officials because they want their case to move along, either their case for resettlement or their case for different assistance within the camp. So at that time, the sort of faith in Western in international systems and international people was strong. So I was a beneficiary of that. I think, if I was to go back now, I suspect it would be a bit different, because the list of broken promises is very long, and people have been stuck there now. It's not 30 years anymore; it's nearly 40 years. So, I think I would be surprised if it was still the same.
Wow. And is the asylum office is inside the camp or outside? How do they apply to asylum to other countries?
So there's a prima facie refugee process. So if you come from Somalia, because you've come from Somalia and Somalia is at war, the UN says you are a refugee and you are fleeing insecurity. But that only gives you the right to be in the camp. It doesn't give you the right to then integrate into Kenyan society. You don't get a Kenyan ID card. You're not allowed to move down into Kenya. There's a roadblock on the road. There are buses that go to the camp and back down into Kenya every day, but the police will stop the bus and will check everybody has a pass and is allowed to go down into Kenya. Of course, there's a big trade in Kenyan ID cards and Kenyan passports. So the UN then allocates a quota for people who are at risk, who should be resettled to third countries. And the people who are supposed to be on that list are victims of sexual violence, child soldiers, anybody who like a single mother. So generally, it's people who are vulnerable in the camp, or who have extreme medical needs or psychosocial needs. And the number of people who are resettled from the camp every year to third countries, and those third countries are the US, the UK, Sweden, Australia, one or two others, not very many, is around 2,000 people a year. Now, the birth rate in the camp is 1,000 people a month. So even without any new refugees coming into the camp, there's no way that the resettlement is going to cope with the number of people in the camp. So they can't go back to Somalia because of the war. They can't go back into Kenya because Kenya won't allow them. They can't go to third countries because third countries only take a tiny number. So many of them are going illegally over the Sahara to the Middle East and to Europe.
Okay, wow. How long you stayed there? 6 years?
Well, I was covering the camp for about 3 years, but in terms of research for this book, I was going back and forth over a period of that period, but being in the camp for about a year total.
Were you ever in danger? Have you ever threatened or something?
No, I never had any problems. I was in the camp when other people were kidnapped, when two European nurses were kidnapped from Médecins Sans Frontières. And I was in the camp when some of my friends were present at shootings. And I did hear gunfire once or twice, but that was a kind of gang warfare. It wasn't anything to do with me personally.
Yeah.
So no, I've had. So yeah, in the camp, no, I personally have had no problems.
Okay. The Kenyan government has threatened many times to close the Dadaab camp, but it's a city. I mean, if you want to close it, how are you gonna move a city with that many people? How does it, if they ever do it, how it's gonna be, and how that gonna mean to the people who live there, have lives, kids. Some kids they don't know other place than that.
I always laugh when I hear the Kenyan government threaten to close the camp, because it's ridiculous. How can you uproot a city? Look at what Israel's trying to do in Gaza at the moment. It's 400,000 people. That's the same number of people who are in Dadaab. You can't move that number of people very easily at all. You can try and make their life difficult, which the Kenyan government is increasingly doing. But you can't wipe the city off the face of the map without, essentially waging war on it. So whatever the Kenyan government might like to do in terms of closing Dadaab, it can't actually do any of those things in practice. And yeah, the truth is, it's the reason why Dadaab is still there is because it's a success, is because it works, it fulfills a function, and there's no alternative. So the people who are there don't have any alternative. They can't go back to Somalia, they can't go to Kenya, they can't go to third countries, and they are making the best of it. They have made an economy, they have made a society, and it works. So, until the Dadaab stops working and stops fulfilling a function, it will be there.
So the Somalis people there, they cannot integrate in Kenya, in the Kenyan society. They cannot go to school. You said there is a block, they cannot even enter. How does that feel? How do they describe it?
So it's very unfair for the refugees living in the camp. They're not allowed to go down into Kenya. But on the other hand, when the camp was first opened, it was the best hospital and the best schools in the north of Kenya. And you had many Kenyans coming to the camp to try and go to school, to get education, to use the hospitals. And indeed, many of the nomadic peoples in northern Kenya were registering as refugees in order to access the food aid.
Oh,
it's very interesting, this parallel economy between Kenya and the camp. So it's by no means all one way that the refugees are trying to get into Kenya. There is also jobs and opportunities within the camp that Kenyans are also looking for.
What kind of jobs the people there? You said they have shops and stuff, but also you mentioned that they sell their rations, their food rations, and they find their way in the market. How is this system working?
Well, it's fascinating because if you imagine, 3, 4, 500,000 people, there is food coming in, hundreds of tons of food coming in every month, which the UN is distributing. That is the basic currency which people are selling. They're turning into money. Then they're using that money to run taxis, hotels, restaurants. They're buying and selling vehicles, weapons, vegetables, clothes, all kinds of stuff. This is the biggest market between Nairobi and Mogadishu. In the Horn of Africa, this is the biggest market. This is where lots of stuff is moving through. You have sugar coming illegally into Somalia, which is going down into Kenya. You have charcoal, which is being illegally grown in Somalia again by Al-Shabaab, coming down into Kenya. So there is a whole black market economy going on here, with a lot of jobs for people, driving, loading warehouses, buying and selling, growing food, running taxis and so on. So not to mention all of the jobs associated with the international humanitarian agencies. So Save the Children, Oxfam, Care International, they all employ drivers, cleaners, camp assistants, and so on. So it is a very particular kind of economy.
You mentioned the Shabab, they trade there also.
Yes, in my experience in the Horn of Africa, when you talk about terrorists, really what you're talking about is mafia, is organized crime, because terrorism and money go together. You can't have one without the other, really. So the Al-Shabaab can't do anything unless they have an income stream. So mostly what they're doing is they're trying to tax people, or they're trying to corner particular industries. And the two industries that they've cornered in Somalia is sugar importation and charcoal export. So the destruction of Somalia's forests for charcoal, which goes to the Middle East, and the importing of sugar, which is used to undermine other sugar markets in East Africa, so in Ethiopia and in Sudan and in Kenya.
You mentioned mafias and those products. Is there any like drug trading, weapon? What kind of?
Not really. I think because the charcoal and the sugar is so lucrative, those are the things that we see in the camp all the time. If you're in the camp, you see the sugar trucks every day, and that's what the mafia are fighting about. You don't see drugs and weapons because really nobody's buying those. I think if there are weapons coming into Somalia, they're probably staying in Somalia. There's not much use for them coming down into Kenya.
When there is a crime in the camp and they catch someone, where do they go? Do they send them to the prison in Kenya, or there's prison there? I don't.
So there is a prison in the camp. It's run by the police. The police the Kenya police are supposed to be the legal authority in the camp. But when I was there, we did find some occasions where the community would apprehend somebody who had done something wrong, and they wouldn't wait for the police. They would do their own community justice, which was whipping people, stripping them naked, shaming them, that kind of thing.
How is it to live? Because you mentioned also there are people from Sudan there. How do they all fit into this community? Did you see the sense?
That's a really great question, and one of the stories that I tell in the book is about a love story between a Somali girl and a Sudanese boy, and the family on each side is actually very hostile to the relationship. They don't mind living near each other, trading, getting along in the camp, but they really don't want the communities to mix. So you can imagine people who have, been exiled from Sudan for 20 years or 30 years, or even from Somalia for a similar period of time. They're quite attached to their culture, to their customs and traditions. They want their children to marry from the community. Meanwhile, you have kids who've grown up in the camp, who've been to the UN schools, they speak good English, they have quite an international outlook, they've learned a lot about the United States and kind of international politics, and they're very open, and they're not dreaming of a life in the camp, they're dreaming of a life beyond. So there is a certain amount of tension, and the youth, one of the characters I followed was a youth leader who has spent a lot of time building a really great culture amongst different youth in the camp. But at the same time, you have these tensions between generations and between communities.
Mm-hmm. Where do you see the future of these leaders, these young people that they are so educated and they know stuff and they know their rights? Where do you see their future?
Well, this is, again, one of the tragedies. So I followed a guy called Tawane, who at that time was in his late 20s, early 30s. He was very young when he came into the camp. And he, in any other society, he would be, making his way in politics, maybe becoming a leader or prime minister. But in the camp, he's stuck, and he can't really progress. And yet he's a hugely talented guy. He runs businesses, he runs charities, he does a lot of negotiation with the UN authorities, but there's nowhere for him to go. So there's a kind of a glass ceiling in the camp. And I think that is one of the really sad things, is all of this talent, which is going to waste. Now, I think there are opportunities, because with all of this online technology that we now have, you could have people working in the camp and contributing to organizations and initiatives elsewhere. You could have people who are engaging in international affairs from the camp in various ways, but it's still no substitute for travel and for being free and being able to make your own life, which is really what everybody should be allowed, and is what the UN Refugee Convention supposedly protects, but the actual practical application of that principle is not working.
Yeah, because the UN and other organizations, they provide education, and these people are so educated, and then they know everything about their rights, but they don't have them. That's the issue. No matter how you teach them, if he's still in a prison,
Yeah,
that's not gonna help.
yeah, exactly
And
right.
and sometimes it's better you don't know your rights. You just, I don't know. Yeah, sometimes it just makes me
Yeah.
crazy because I remember some stories and also people that I have left behind, and it's just difficult. Has anything changed over the years? Have anything improved there?
No, is the answer. It's gotten worse because the budgets have been cut. So the health provision, the rations, that has deteriorated over time. The attitude of the Kenyan government has hardened. They keep threatening to close Dadaab on a more frequent basis. Like I said, they can't do that, but every time they declare that intention, they make life for the refugees harder. I think the population has gone down somewhat because people have given up on the camp. They prefer to go back to Somalia, even though Somalia is more insecure. So I think that the camp is the failure of the camp means that the population goes down. The success of the camp is not just driven by the numbers in the camp are not just driven by the numbers of people being displaced from Somalia or Sudan. The numbers are being also driven by the fact that life in the camp is better than life in Somalia or Sudan. So as the life in the camp gets squeezed, people choose to go back. That doesn't mean that Somalia is safer. It just means that the camp is less successful as a safety net.
What is the situation now in Somalia? Did you meet anybody dream of coming back? Do they have this hope?
Lots of people have gone back to Somalia. Parts of Somalia are more peaceful now. It is a bit more stable, but I don't think Al-Shabaab have gone away. It's just that they are focusing on their business and they're not trying to control people's lives so much. So they're focusing less on the kind of religious element. But Somalia is still not a very safe place to live, and especially if you've been traumatized, you probably don't want to go back to Somalia. There is one story that I wrote about, I wrote about it in the Guardian newspaper, not in the book, of a young guy who was resettled to Sweden, and he asked 3 times the Swedish government to send him back to Dadaab because he missed it so much. That was where his friends were, that's where his life was. He had a little radio show in the camp, and he felt, that he was at home there. And he left his girlfriend there, and so it's not straightforward. If you're forced to be in a place, you, even if it's tough, you develop an attachment, and it becomes home.
Yeah. You mentioned in your book that you went to the US to talk to politicians about the camp there. Did you go to the White House? I forgot.
Yeah, so the book starts in the White House, and the National Security Council asked for a briefing about the radicalization of young people in the camp, and they said their assumption was, because life in the camp is difficult and Al-Shabaab is close by, that the conditions in the camp would be radicalizing young people. And I said, actually, no, that's not the case. Yes, people are poor, but just because life is tough doesn't mean that people then turn to suicidal Islamism as a solution. And actually, most people in the camp are really pro-Western. They're very pro-democracy. They've had a wonderful education in the camp, courtesy of the United Nations. And you don't need to worry. These kids are great. But then the irony was the National Security Council said, oh, okay, wonderful. So we don't need to worry about Dadaab. We don't need to solve the intractable refugee problem. We don't need to give them any more money. We just forget about them. So the problem of Western discourse is that we only care about these kids if they are terrorists or if they're at risk of becoming terrorists. And that's the time when we need to wake up and pay attention to them. But otherwise, we don't care about their rights. We forget about them. So that was profoundly depressing. That this was, as soon as they realized that these young people were not terrorists or at risk of becoming terrorists, then they ceased to be of interest.
And this is also what they say about, Palestine and Gaza. I heard someone, it hurt me a lot. He was saying about the Arabs. He say, look at the rich Arabs. They are okay, they are calm. And look at the poor Arabs. They are making all the problems. That's just, I don't, like, where do you live, bro, to say something like that? I mean, I don't know. And they,
Absolutely.
yeah, they don't know that the rich people in Saudi Arabia and Emirates, they are financing this stuff. Most of the time, the finance is coming from there. It's not about, I don't know how to explain it, but it's just, oh my God. Who did you talk to? Was it under the administration of Obama?
Yeah.
Okay. Wow. Did you meet him?
I knew him before because before he was a senator, he was a professor at the University of Chicago, and I studied at the University of Chicago, and I was also on the faculty there. So we knew each other a little bit back in 1999. We had Christmas together in 1999. But his policy, I mean, the policies of the American government have not really changed very much from one administration to the other. Though the Trump Muslim ban was a big problem, particularly for refugees in Dadaab who were supposed to be coming to the United States. So it was good that Biden reversed that. But broadly speaking, I think that there's not that much difference between different administrations and their approach to refugees.
Now that we are 2024, has passed so many years since you were there. How do you feel about your work there and your book now? How do you look at it now? And would you do anything different if you go back in time?
I'm happy that I was able to have the chance to spend that time, to write that book, to bring that story to the world. A lot of people have read the book. It's now taught on syllabuses in lots of universities and colleges, which is very makes me happy. That it's useful, that people are finding it useful. I'm not sure I would do anything differently. I think what I did choose to do was to tell a story instead of working for Human Rights Watch and banging on the door and arguing for policy reform. And I think that was the right decision. That was the right thing for me to do because I reached more people through telling that story than I did from just doing the legal reports. The main thing I wish is that my friends who are still there, that their situation could improve more. They've benefited in some way because they all shared a small amount in the profits from the book. So Guled now has a taxi and he has a business, and his life in the camp for him is a bit better. But my real hope would have been that he actually made it to the United States, and I tried to help get his case moved along within the UN for him to be resettled to the United States, but that failed. So his life is better than it was, but it's not where it should have been.
He was a child soldier. Why in the hell they don't want to help him? I mean,
that's exactly the problem, because he was a child soldier. So how do you, this is the irony, right? The child soldiers should be top of the list, but because they've been combatants, the US and other countries are nervous. What if he's a sleeper?
Oh my God. What do you think the solution here?
Yeah, so I think the solution is all written down. The UN has procedures for verifying who are genuine child soldiers and who needs protection and who needs support. We just need to make it work. The UN system up until the 1990s was working very well. Millions of people were resettled from Bosnia, from Sudan, from other places. It works. It's just it needs to be made to work. It needs to be funded.
Mm-hmm. Oh my God. I don't know. Sometimes I feel like they're doing it on purpose. It's just policies, just, I don't know who's making these policies, who's responsible to, I don't know. It's just so difficult for me to understand. And you were there and you witnessed it, so I think it's more difficult for you to just wrap your head around this.
Well, what I've tried to do with the book is exactly that, is to wrap my head around it. It's to show you all the reasons why this tragedy is happening and all the reasons why it's so difficult to solve. And hopefully through that, then we have empathy for the people who are victims of these circumstances. And we try and, do our best.
Do you stay in touch with the people some people you interviewed there? Do you still speak to them?
Yeah. I had a phone call from one of them in Australia the other day. And unfortunately, like I said, Guled is still in the camp. Some of the others have gone back to Somalia. But yeah, they're all doing well in some way.
Do you speak to Guled?
He's the one I stay in touch with the most, yeah. He sends me the pictures of his kids and I send him pictures of my kids.
I don't want to spoil the book, but I have to ask you, is he still with his wife?
Yes.
Oh, the same wife, Mariam, right?
Mariam, yeah.
Oh my God, I feel like
only just. They've had some tough times, but yes.
They have kids now.
They have 5.
Oh my God, wow. Because I'm still reading about Guled. He's a kid, teenager, doing teenage stuff. Yeah. Oh my God, wow. Wow, it's just, like I said before, proves that the human spirit, you cannot break it. I don't know.
Yeah.
You can. Oh my God, wow. You have another book, Radio Congo. Can you tell us what is it about?
Radio Congo is a journey through the war in Congo in 2007. And I was traveling around trying to meet people who were living in the war zone, which is very underreported. So most of the reporting focuses on Goma and Masisi on the border with Rwanda. But there's a big area of Eastern Congo which is also affected by the war, but is not really covered very much. So the book tells the story of how people are surviving within the war. It was super interesting and again very, very moving to see how people are surviving in these difficult circumstances.
Where else have you been to report about issues like this in Africa?
And then my most recent book is called The Tree Line, and that is about communities in the boreal forest around the Arctic Circle who are being affected by climate change. So how are they making sense of climate change? How are they changing and adapting? So First Nations people in Alaska, in Canada, in Greenland, indigenous Sami people in Norway, and in Ganasan in Russia. So as well as scientists who are telling us about what's happening. So it's a kind of travel book, but it's also a science book, and it's again a sort of investigation into how humans make sense of difficult circumstances.
Yeah. Wow. Have you been to Western Sahara?
I have not. No.
My grandparents from there. I'm stateless, so I was born in Algeria, but my grandparents from there. And I feel bad because I can never see it.
Yes.
I am never allowed there to the real one and to the camps because that there are camps.
Yes, similar to Dadaab. They've been there for 50 years. Yeah.
Yeah, in south of Algeria, in Tindouf. And I remember my grandmother, I was a kid, she was telling me stories about that and how they made their homes, if you can call them homes. They just
Yeah.
gather whatever and build something. And she used to tell me that they had to wait. She was a kid and she would be thirsty, and they have to wait for the truck to come to give them water. And she said they would pour it outside in this thing, and it was so hot. Yeah, I cannot. And the weather, there is the rain when sometimes it's the desert, but when it rains, it's just like tsunami. It's just so. She told me a lot of stuff about that. Yeah, and so every time I ask people if they've been there, because I want something. I want connection.
Of course.
Yeah, it's very difficult. Yeah. All right. I think I am done. No, I have another question. So, can you tell us about the Black Mountains College, your project, the one that you founded?
So after writing that book about Dadaab, City of Thorns, I came back to Wales, and I have a family here. And I thought, well, how do we, what can I do? I can't just write books. I could, but I don't want to just do that. I also want to educate people about justice and about adapting to this changing world. And a lot of the problems that are driving underlying problems that are driving the issues in the Horn of Africa are to do with the climate and the environment, the changing environment, drought and conflict-driven drought, climate-driven conflict in the Horn of Africa. So the Black Mountains College is about climate change and about justice in the permacrisis. So how do we understand where we are? How do we, taking a critical look at the history of colonialism and capitalism, and how do we imagine better futures? So sharing the resources we have, coming to terms with the climate changes that we can't alter, and the things that we can alter, and trying to build better systems. So we have a degree which is called Arts, Ecology and Systems Change, which invites students to imagine a better world and tries to support them in small ways to deliver that change. So it's an activist college. It's a place where you come to learn how to make a better, fairer world. And we're very young. This is year 4. And we have about 80 students at the moment. But we are hoping to grow to a few hundred students over the next few years.
And these students are refugees or no?
At the moment, because of our racist government, we don't have a license to have international students. We only have UK students. But once we have a track record, then we can apply for a license, and then we can host international students, as well as at the moment we could host refugees who are UK residents. And we are partnered with Cardiff Metropolitan University, which is a university of sanctuary, and they have pathways for asylum and refugee students. So we can offer places through that.
I hope so. I hope you can do that. Thank you so much, Ben. This was amazing. I could ask you 1,000 questions, to be honest. It's just, talking to you is amazing.
It's a pleasure to chat to you.
Yeah, really. Thank you so much. Thank you for all work that you do. And I really sincerely thank you, because I feel like you helped a lot of people that I feel like in a way you helped my grandmother. She didn't have someone go there and speak to her, interview her and ask her about her issues. In a way, you helped a lot. So thank you so much. I'm honored to know you, to meet you, to speak to you.
No, my pleasure. Thanks for having me on the show. And
can we put,
good luck with it.
Thank you. Can we put the links to your books in the description?
Please.
So people can cool. And the link to, can you send me the link to your college also?
Yes,
okay,
no problem. I'll
cool.
do that.
Amazing. Thank you so much.
All right,
take care. Bye.